All right, I'm so excited. We have Richard Hill here with us. Richard, welcome.
Yep, I'm here from down under, beaming up through the mega space. It's fabulous to be here.
It's something about you being down there. Every time I talk to someone in Australia, it feels like I get rays of sunshine. It's just
Yeah, there's plenty at the moment. We've been wanting. Oh, the other day we were like about 115 degrees.
wow.
And I didn't participate in any of it. No, thank you. We actually went to the office. We
Is
sat in the air
okay.
conditioning in the office.
Excellent. So yeah, I would love to dive in and do talk about what you're doing. You have a lot of passions. First, I'm curious though, where we want to start. Like you started out performing and as an actor, right? That was your
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and some say from a very early age. In fact, in fact, my mother almost says that she could hear a little voice from within the womb saying, "I'm coming out. Get the lights ready." So it was sort of poof,
Right.
hey,
Ta-da.
But but I but I mean, what is an actor? It's someone who likes to express what's within outwardly. So
Right.
it's a difference between someone who's gregarious or perhaps extroverted. I mean, you need a bit of that, although there are plenty of very introverted and gregarious actors. But yeah, this desire to sort of convey something across
Mm.
space, uh, and it's always fascinated me. And the fact that I then in my sort of second career, mid forties, mid forties, I woke up and I said, I'm not
Hmm.
famous. Damn. Oh, gee, we got close. Gee, we got close to a couple of really good things. But then going into sort of human behavior and psychotherapy and hypnosis. And it was sort of like, well, duh, it's just the same stuff. It's just the
The
same stuff.
same that was where I was wondering. I was thinking about going there about this the same stuff. So I just wonder what was the transition? You're like, okay, I'm not Hugh Jackman, so now what?
Yeah, yeah, well, kind of was Hugh Jackman, but
Yeah, you had the
no,
six
no,
pack.
he's very, very talented. Yeah, no, no, a couple of great breaks. I mean, he actually got his break from doing an old show, Paint Your Wagon, and he was in the West Australian, and that was where people saw him, and he made his first impact. And I actually did a show here in Australia called Applause with Eve Arden came out, the American comedian, and I was sort of playing with her. Show flopped. The producers ran away with the money.
Why
We,
is that?
we
Okay, so just to deviate a little bit, because I've always pondered, you have all these actors. Why do some make it and some don't?
yeah. I mean, talent is certainly, and Hugh Jackman, no questioning the fact, super talent, but luck is an enormous part of it.
Yeah,
Every actor will tell you this. So there was that show, there was that guy I knew,
right.
there was persistence, there was determination. I mean, I did a pilot for a television show, which then later on became popular, but they just said, too expensive. So it is very much. It is very much, and there's some great actors who've never got the break, and there's some not so great actors who have. We've got a wonderful expression in acting saying they're because you sort of say you break into acting, you break in, and we said, well, there's some people who've broken into acting who should be fined for trespassing.
I could think of some names right off the top of my head. Yeah,
Yeah, but I think that's every profession.
right.
We get some people
Yeah,
saying, why are they the big name and not somebody else? And so there's lots of things, and in other businesses, it's good marketing.
right.
I think one of the scariest things, but it was true. He said, "Best known beats best." Was talking about a business motivation,
Yeah,
and I thought, unfortunately, that's true. Um,
unfortunately, right.
so the idea is if you're best, be best known. I don't know what the game is, but
That's another
yeah,
topic. Yeah. So in the like
we
transition, yeah, back to your
yeah.
transition.
Well, I just sort of woke up at my mid forties, midlife. Uh, I thought my midlife would be easy, No, but I had to face the fact that I didn't quite, I didn't get those opportunities. It didn't work out. The two or three pilots that I did didn't work out. Blah
Sure.
blah blah. And so it was like, what do I do now? I'm pretty proactive, pretty out there, and was interesting. Again, here's this happenstance of life.
Right.
My sister finished doing a Bachelor of Arts degree, which she'd been doing for like 12 years.
Yeah.
They do 3 words and then take a couple of months off.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe I should go and educate because I had all these fabulous passes for university and scholarships and things. And I went, oh, I think I'll be an actor, uh, which we don't know what was a good idea. But anyway, I thought I'll go study some stuff. What do I study? I don't know, language, because I talk a lot. So I picked up a book by a guy named Steven Pinker on sort of the
Oh, yeah.
neuroscience. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
I know
language.
Bill Gates said that was his favorite book. Steven Pinker, like, yeah.
Yeah. And I went, the neuroscience of language. Ooh. Anyway, off I went.
Yeah.
So I did linguistics, and I did this Bachelor of Arts in Linguistics, and it was so funny because we were in the one term, and it was phonetics. So phonetics is the sound and shape of sounds, and the teacher sort of said, well, different countries they have different way they do the sounds, so and that's why we get these accents. And I said, oh yeah, we did that in acting school. And she said, oh, did that? I said, well, yes. I mean, in Irish, you change your I goes to oi. And there's a few things, and then you get the lilted, and then it's pretty easy to quickly turn over, and you'll be talking in the Irish because that's the way it goes. And anyway, I did a 20-minute stand-up uh, in, in the class, and I thought, oh, this university's easy. Uh, anyway, I did that, and then I went off and in happenstance. And there was the things meeting Ernie Rossi and going to counseling and things. That's another story. But so anyway, I am there and I do meet Ernest Rossi and I get into psychotherapy. And I said to Ernie, but I'd like to talk here. The actor. I've got ideas. I want to put
Yeah.
across. He said, well, go talk to Jeff Zeig. And Jeff Zeig's the head honcho of Ericsson. And I said, Jeff, I'd like to talk here.
Yeah.
I'm Australian. And he said, Richard, you need to have a master's degree in order to be able to present at the Milton Erickson Foundation. But you see, I'm Australian. I just said, oh, okay, I'll get one of those. So I went home and this guy I know who read one of my books said,
Yep.
come and do this course. Okay, happenstance, but not just happenstance, responding and moving with it,
That's
reacting,
where I want to touch
engaging.
in a little bit. Yeah.
Ah,
happenstance and response. Yeah. And I
so
did my
anyway,
research. You have the, I think, 25 master's degrees now.
yeah, about 25. So I ended up with 3 master's degrees because they kept saying, hey, do one of those. And then I thought, I know a lot about neuroscience, but so I went and did a brain and mind thing. And I kept saying to Ernie, I said, what about this PhD thing? He said, don't worry about that. That's easy. I thought, I'm not sure that's quite true, Ernie. He said, no, actually, seriously, don't do a PhD until it means something to you and
Mm.
the question matters. So anyway,
Yeah.
2 years ago, I said, oh, my God, I've got a question. So I've actually just before I came on to you, I'm putting the finishing touches on the thesis. So
So what's the question?
the question is this responsiveness. What is it? What is this? What is this thing of engaging with people in
Yes.
therapy and in acting and
Yes.
in social conversations? And why do we stuff it up?
Mm.
What are the good qualities? What are the strong qualities? So I've now been, really thinking about this, and we've got some good ideas. So
So what are some of your hypotheses? Why do we stuff it up? So I'm assuming you're talking about the happenstance happens, and then we're like the response is we don't hear it, or we don't respond, or we don't believe it. Oh, that's not possible.
And that was the first book that I had, which I showed to Ernest Rossi, which he said, "Oh, this is you're not stupid. You can stay with me."
Great
And
compliment. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. But it's the total permeation through our bodies and through our system, and now it's embedded within everywhere of what I call the winner-loser world, and
Mm.
that's the external judgment that we're evaluated by how we function externally.
Okay.
So I measure up. I'm good enough, and I get it. All the
Yeah.
stuff saying I'm good enough, but the question, good enough for what?
Yeah.
good enough for somebody else's expectations. Well, what the hell is that? So the problem is not that you don't feel good enough. The problem is that you value above your own sense other people's expectations and other people's
Mm,
demands and other people's rules. And this is why when you're in a situation where they say they keep moving the goalposts, meaning I keep trying to find what they want, and then they move what they want.
right.
Well, they're the smart ones. So then everybody gets panicky and nothing works for me. Well, people could say, "Oh, the acting thing," and they kept moving the goalposts. I said, "No, I just kept running after different goalposts." I said, "Hey, how about we kick here?" Uh, and
Interesting. Yeah.
like Eric, Zeig saying get a master's degree. I said, okay,
Okay.
if
And that
that's the
was flaws
goalpost,
you
I'll do
did
that.
post. Yeah. So
Yeah.
interesting. I'm wondering then how it like Napoleon Hill, he talks about having that single purpose and accomplishing that. Is that what you're kind of leaning towards? Like person someone should have I see
And
you're
here's
about to
what's
say something.
interesting.
Yeah.
No, no, yes and no.
Okay.
And I get it. And I get the Napoleon Hill, but it's very much about how to conquer the outside world, how
Mm.
to become successful in a world that is a pile of wally. Uh,
Pile of
like,
Wallies.
so he
Let me
gets
write
us
that
get
down.
yeah, pile of wally. That's an Australian expression.
Yeah.
So if anyone named their child Wally, it's very bad for them. But the essence of it is, um, there needs to be a single sense, and this is over the years of what I've come to do. Like there's
Yes.
single focus acting, single focus this.
Yeah.
Uh, no, the single focus is my capacity to be,
Mm.
and that's it. Now go out and be it, and and what's available. So, I mean, it's all those cliches of, it's not what the world makes for you, it's what you make from the world. And,
Right.
it's your attitude towards things. All those things are true, but all those things are competing against the incredible pressure to be something that the world wants you to be, or the world considers to be successful,
Right.
because most of the things that the world considers successful, they'll give you money for.
Mm.
So there's another thing. I became disinterested in money. In fact, I've lost all my money twice, uh,
Interesting.
because I thought, I'll do this one. And I did the single focus, and
Yeah.
I single focused on the wrong damn thing.
Oh, so how do you know the right thing?
That's the question. And
Yes.
you don't. And you don't. What you do, I had a lovely client and she struggled with life. She had all kinds of learning difficulties and all kinds of traumas and all kinds of stuff. And she was trying to learn how to live.
Yes.
And we kind of boiled it down after a while. And I said, look, it's simple. You make a decision or a choice. A choice is a little bit looser than a decision, but they're the same type of thing. You say, I'm going to do that. You then do it. You see what happens. What sucked, you don't do again. What was good, you do again. And what was repairable, you alter and you add. Then you start again. And she said,
Mm.
life can't be that. So I said, darling, I think that's it. We just get up in the morning, we make a choice, we make a decision. Now, if I choose that the world determines my value and
Mm.
that I'm going to run around like a blue ass fly trying to keep up and match and measure up,
Right.
then yeah. The trouble is, people do that. It sucks, and then they do it again just to see if it doesn't suck next time.
Right.
When things sucked, I stopped doing them.
So how does a person cross over into that? That's I'm thinking
Yeah.
something. I'm imagining some hands are involved here.
Well, this. First of all, we've got to understand that life isn't. I do that and then that happens. That linear
Okay.
thing.
Right.
That linear does. There are linear things, but fundamentally, it's a system. And the system runs on principles and organizing frameworks. So that
Mm.
organizing framework, I can do stuff. Not I can do anything. There's nothing that can stop me. That's all external. Somebody else said
Yeah.
that conquering everything was a thing. I can do stuff. Now, that is my organizing principle. So what I do is I go out and I do it. And what stuff do I do? The stuff is available that is available for me to do. So what do I need to be? I need to notice that there is stuff there that's available for me to do, rather than stuff that's trying to make me, that's kind of, pull me in. So you need curiosity.
Yes.
You need to not go, where is it? What's the thing? Oh, if you go desperate, then what you're going to find is the stuff that satisfies your desperation. If you're curious, you're going to find the stuff that excites you and interests you.
Mm.
So curiosity is really important. Being dynamic, being this understanding that there's an interplay and that things are complex and not everything happens the way you want it to. You also need to collaborate.
Mm.
That's really important. Not give away your
Yes.
stuff to somebody else, but collaborate. Find
Yes.
collaborators.
Yes.
So I've had opportunities, some fabulous opportunities, and it was the quality of the collaborators. Like when I say I lost all my money twice, one was a film project. One of the guys actually was a pathological liar.
Mm.
I didn't pick it. Crap collaborator, So
Right.
yeah. So all the stuff that he promised and all the things weren't
Right.
true and money went poof, you know.
Yes.
But I learned a lot.
Right.
And now I have great collaborators, and I collaborate. I'm collaborating with you.
I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah. It's one of my
Yeah.
things that I don't want to diverge too much, but like in my affirmations in the morning, one of them is I attract people that align with my vision and reflect my brilliance. And, so it's like, it's something how that works. And I want to go back to, I like it. The part about being curious. So
Yeah.
for me, for instance, I have a library of so many books, probably 1,000 books,
Yeah.
and I'm curious about all of them. So then,
Yeah.
and then you talk about desperation. And then, so sometimes I feel like that. I was like, what am I going to read now? And then, so how do
Yeah.
you land on one thing and be curious about that one thing?
So I spent a few weeks or months or years having to think about that.
Yeah.
What is it? Because of course, acting is just based in curiosity. You
Mhm.
just step on the stage, and
Yeah.
okay, you've got frameworks. I mean, I'm not. You can't just go and go, oh, everything's this sort of thing. Everything's everything. No, it's not. There's, if the door is closed and you walk into it, it's going to hurt. And you've got to figure out how to open it,
Yeah.
and you've got to be sensible with things. Uh, but creative, of course, that's one of the other things. And curiosity and creativity are really intermingled. And curiosity for information. As we need information. And what's interesting is the creative process goes through a 4-stage cycle. And
Oh,
actually, this goes back to mathematics but
yeah.
this is gold. This is how universes get created. This is how genes express themselves. This is how we function. This is how relationships, everything. You start with new information
Okay.
because there's nothing to create with it. There's nothing new. So there has to be something new come across. You just walk around the corner and there's something. Okay, new information.
Yeah.
And that's what the books do, and that's what all the study does, and that's what all the degrees, which are very useful. Then you have to make that information relevant to you. What does that mean to me? What's that? What is that about? And so this is the therapy area. This is the self
Mm.
therapy, going to see somebody. But this is the collaborative therapeutic area. You can have
Mm.
collaboration for extracting information, but you can collaborate with others to help you do it. Then you get a breakthrough. You go, oh, I get it. A lot of the times it's insight. Sometimes it's slow, but you go, I get it. Then you go,
Mm.
and now you have a new understanding and a new perception and something new, and you go, and now you start creating. So you get the creative
Mm.
spurt, and that can be, you've come out of a terrible drama, like someone stealing all your money, and then you go, because I'm an idiot. What do I create with that?
Yeah.
Don't be an idiot, and so kind of fundamentally.
Right.
Uh, and then this is a really important one, the 4th stage, is you need to then stop, contemplate, just review it. Did I get that right? Was that good? What are the
Yeah.
good bits? again, you've made decisions, you've made things. What are the good bits? What are the bad bits? What do I keep? What do I do? Then you implement that into your life. That's the
Yeah.
creative cycle. And curiosity draws you towards the information. Now, as I said, there's all this wonderful information in books and things, how it works, what it is, pull it apart, do that. So we find it by deliberate investigation.
Mm.
But in my little talks about things, curiosity, information also comes to us serendipitously through
Right.
play. And
Oh,
play as
yes.
in not, going out and play football. It's unregulated, unsupervised, not defined activity. Just you go in, see what happens. Really
Yes.
see what happens.
Yes.
And you play. And then, like Jeff Sykes says, go and get a master's degree. Okay, information. Okay, I'll go do that. I then go back and I
Yeah.
play and I talk to people and I go, hey, I'm going to do it today. I should do a master's degree. And then one of them says, well, why don't you do one at this course? Now I'm into new information.
Yep.
Okay, I'll go do that.
Yep.
And then you do it. So I go do the course. I'm sitting there. Yeah, but what does this mean? What does
What's
this
it
mean
mean
to
to
me?
me? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my hand became, like the demon's seed because, professors would be up there giving all this fabulous book information. And I'd say, yeah, but how does that to relate to my human experience on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
Anyway, and you could see them when my hand started, they go, oh. Anyway, but that's the flow of it. And the stage two, as we call it, is the dark night of the soul. That's,
You're right.
do I do this? Do I go there? Why? But then when it means something, like this PhD, I've had a ball with it. But I can imagine someone 25, 28, got to get a PhD. If I don't get a PhD, I won't have a job. And if I don't get a job, and I've got to get this, and I've got to
Right.
publish all this stuff.
That
And it's
pressure. Yeah.
yeah, it's no longer curiosity for creativity. It's curiosity, and then it just becomes demand.
Mm.
And people, a lot of
Mm.
the time, oh, I'm really curious. I say, no, you're responding to demand. You're pressured by
Right.
demand.
Oh man, that's great stuff.
Yeah.
I love that. And and you talking about play reminds me of, and back to your performing days of, I was doing comedy improv for a while. It's kind of like that. The whole yes and thing. Yes, this just
But
happened, and now let's play with it.
yeah. And so what I do a lot is that now over the years, and I've been, I'm sort of in the middle of it. Yes, and, or the yes and's good, yes, but bad. But now I'm a bit older and I've gone through some things and I go, just a minute, where did the yes, but come from?
Mm,
Where, why did yes and get depressed? This is why that thing I say when people say, I'm not good enough. I said, good enough for who? Where did, where did somebody's opinion about you overtake yours? Now, I just put a codicil, I codified that in that we actually embed a lot of not good enough things from the external world, from traumas, from
yeah.
people. So I get all that. So I'm not by any means saying it's a bad thing to do. It's just when you stop and you go, well, good enough for what? And you go, well, good enough for my goddamn mother or my goddamn father or my goddamn uncle or the goddamn teachers. They were the problem.
Right.
I wasn't the problem. I might not have been good enough for the thing that they wanted. We got a wonderful story. I've seen it written in many places, but we talk about it with our Aboriginal kids who are very even-handed, very accepting of each other. And the teacher
Yeah.
comes along and says, "Here we are. Look, we'll all have a race, and we'll have a race to see who can, and we'll see who wins the race." Bringing the win or loser world into the story, and the kids say, "Ah, yeah, Billy will win." And she gives the good, business, and unfortunately Norman Peele approach. No, if you really oppose, you could beat Billy. I
Yeah.
said, no, he's the fastest runner. And anyway, she said, but I'll give you an ice cream if you win the race. And they all went, so now there's Billy and things,
Right.
and little Betty who can hardly keep her feet in front of herself. And Billy, they go. Billy goes off like the wind. He's racing up, and a few of the other kids, and Betty's tripping over herself and pulling
Yeah.
herself up. And Billy gets 1 foot from the finish line. He stops. He waits for everyone to catch up. Betty finally gets up there. They all hold hands, step over the line, and say, "Ice cream, please."
Oh, sweet.
So they didn't conform. They figured out what it meant to them. What it meant to them was getting an ice cream. How do we do? What do we create to do that? We acknowledge the truth of the matter, and
Yep.
truth has no energy. It's only our opinions that have
Mm.
all the energy. So they just
Oh,
decided
yeah.
the truth, and
Love
that's a
that.
beauty, isn't it? Oh, that's a
Yes.
good one. That one.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down too.
Uh, 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 if you try and solve problems from the place, this is what we talk in ego state therapy, which is good,
Yeah.
but it's again a derivative of stuff that was said by Plato and Socrates. But the if you like that thing in the Coney Island that spins around,
Right.
and you've got to sit on the very top, or otherwise, if you're on anywhere down the edges, you get thrown off
Right.
as it goes. That's because the top is the truth. That's the point of truth.
Mm.
Everywhere else is an opinion, is an intention, is a hope, is a wish. Uh, and so in life, you need to find that point where there is no pull or push.
Right.
Then you can move out into the pull and push space, and you can be curious, and you can begin from a point of safety. So when I'm working with therapy, what we do is we don't try and fix the problem, we try and get to them a point of truth. Then we go back, get to a point of energetic safety. Uh,
So that's the
so,
follow-up question for people listening and watching. Like, how do I get to the point of truth?
yeah. And again, it comes back to curiosity. So when you begin to really generate this curiosity and practice with it, you begin to find it becomes part of your lifestyle. And actually, I talk about the power of curiosity squared. Is when you're
Mm.
curious as a base frame, that you just wake up in the morning saying, "Well, I wonder
Right.
what's going to happen today."
Yeah.
Because you can't be curious about everything. Then you get curious about things in particular. Then you're curious from curiosity. So it's curiosity squared.
Oh, interesting.
And I with the kids, the little grandkids, I
Yeah.
walk down the street. I've been doing it forever with the one who's now 8, but with the now we've got 3 and 2. And when we walk down the street, if there's a sign or there's a pole or there's something, I'll go and knock on it, see what sound it makes. Uh,
Yeah.
and just to and a bench, we'll do that. We'll go, oh, it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sound at all. We'll go, oh, and we express excitement and disappointment
Yes.
and surprise and all that. And the other day, little 3-year-old, we're walking down the street. They'd put up a new bench on the side of the thing. He walked over and he knocked on it. I said, "My job is done." You
Job
know,
is done.
you know, uh, but we are afraid to find out the sound of things. We are afraid to
Oh,
find
yeah.
out, and quite reasonably so, because we get punished for not
Right.
complying, for not complying.
Right.
Um, and so it's not easy, and that's why we have every 5 seconds there's another one with the answer. Uh, They're
Yes.
not the answer. They're all the answers. They're all the mechanisms, the games, the opportunities, and what I call the possibilities.
Mm.
Uh, so I talk about not doing a thing that will fix you, but going away from the things and going back to the possibilities
I love it.
and allow something to emerge. And then suddenly you find yourself an actor doing 3 master's degrees and a PhD and talking to Ryan
I'm talking to Ryan. Yeah. That's
on
hilarious. It reminds me of two things that popped in my head as you're talking, going backwards. You're talking about being curious and people saying this is the answer, and it's being curious what's behind the curtain of Oz. Like, hey.
yeah. Yeah. And that's what we do. So we get fixed on that. So we get fixated on that, what's behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So whereas now I go, yeah, what's behind the curtain? That's it. But what's the curtain? Why is there a curtain? What's the curtain made of?
Oh,
What's on the wall? What's on
I
that
love
wall?
that.
Just a minute. What's
Yes.
on the ceiling? Who cares about the curtain? But why are you making me think about a curtain? Just a minute. I'm really interested in that thing over there. Wow, look at that, a squirrel. And I must admit, if I were ADD, I'd be in a lot of trouble. But
And it
but
reminds
I've
me, yeah. No,
but I've
go
got that
ahead.
sort of I've got that sort of people have that sort of brain. ADD is just where sometimes it gets curtailed, but the value of that fascination with
Right.
everything is what we can utilize.
It reminds me of Leonardo da Vinci, just being curious about everything. Like, oh, the birds are flapping their wings. Do they flap faster up or faster down? Like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
asking questions.
Yeah, there was a guy early 1900s, and he's catching the elevator, newfangled elevators, and they've got a guy operating it. He's operating a little turn things that start it and stop
Yeah.
it. And every day they go down and they go down the elevator, and the guy's not all that good because it's a new thing. And at the bottom of the elevator, and people get off going, "Oh, bloody elevator driver," and things. This guy walks up and go, "Oh, I'm going down. I get heavier. I get lighter. I get heavier." Goes off and figures out the theory of gravity, and he's called Isaac. He's called Einstein, and off he goes.
Off he
Uh,
goes.
and to see what you don't, to look for what you don't see yet,
Oh,
is just a way of living that we don't have. It's suppressed in so many ways, uh, and the uh, the absence of truth is the greatest strength and power that a dominator can exhibit. Now, this is what happens in coercive control. We've seen it in the
mhm.
small frame. And so what they do is they make the person feel as though they don't know what's true anymore, and they have to rely on their truth. You go to schools. Schools say, you don't know anything.
Right.
You won't be anything until you know this stuff, and this is the truth. And then you come out, you find you've been at wonky college for the last 50 years and everything was wrong.
Right.
We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it played around.
Right.
We've seen it for decades. We've seen it for centuries. Uh, and, 1984, the book was all about that. It was about um, controlling and contracting truth and extracting it from the energetic frame of the person. And then you can do whatever you want with them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley had the other idea. He said, just don't make anything matter and just drag everybody up to hell, and do it that way. So we're doing a bit of both, but
There's
this is
power
what
to that.
everybody should go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to be curious about what's truthful.
Mm,
And if something doesn't feel truthful, keep being curious about it until it is.
right.
And how do you know it's truthful? Because it ceases to have energetic push and pull.
Wow. I feel like I gotta pause this. I'll watch it back and pause it because some of these, like these little nuggets you talk about, these little
Yeah.
nuggets, we just sit,
Yeah.
let our mind be curious about these nuggets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, I am 70. So, I should have a couple of bits up my sleeve, but of course, doing the work I do now. And it was really interesting. Am I satisfied with the change? Uh, and I'll tell you a story on that. Everything's a
Yeah,
story because
everything's a story. I'm loving these
so
stories.
I got a book contract to write a book called Choose Hope,
Yeah.
which I've redone. I've got it on a thing called Books By now, and people, but stories, just stories of life and what's their power, what's the meaning,
Yeah.
and in it. And so I was traveling around the world. And I actually didn't even know the four-stage cycle then, but I knew it intuitively. But I'm traveling around, and I was in London, and I went down the West End, and they had West Side Story on. Now, when I was younger, I auditioned for West Side Story, and I was very close to getting it.
Hmm.
Like there were like three people. And I remember the guy saying to me, would you dye your hair blonde? I said, mate, I'd paint my toenails pink. Nobody laughed. But anyway, but I nearly got it. Yeah, I nearly got it. Anyway, the production didn't actually go ahead. So, but
Hmm.
anyway, so I'm there. It's now 20 years later, and I went to see the show, and I'm watching it, and it was a beautiful production. And I'm sitting there and also had this thing of, oh my God, I could have done that. And I just started to cry. I started
Yeah.
weeping out here. And there was a lovely Irish lady, older. They said, "Oh, darling, what? Well, you were all right there." I said, I could have done that." Anyway, and her Englishman was saying, don't talk to strange men." Ah, he's all right. He's just an old man crying. Don't worry. Um, but further ahead of me, I was in about the 6th or 7th row, last minute ticket.
Yeah.
And further ahead, about the 3rd row, a bunch of young people got up and they went, "Oh, great show." Yeah. And they looked at each other for a second. There was a beat pause and they said, "Pizza?" And I thought, wow, is that all it means? Is that it? Like the meaning lasted for, wow, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And of course, now the work I do, people's lives change. And
Right.
they take these nuggets away with them. And I've got a lass, some of these nuggets have come out from the work with her. And she was stuffed. She knew it. And we spent a year bringing her up to speed with her own self.
Mm.
Anyway, she's met somebody. It's going really great. She's still a bit of a weirdo, but you know, there there are things that she couldn't manage that she would sabotage or she would catastrophize that now she doesn't. And I go, I played a part in that.
Right.
Well done.
Well
You know,
done. Yeah.
it certainly makes getting up tomorrow morning interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I resonate with what you're saying because a previous life I was a stand-up comedian. I was like, I tried to say, well, I could kind of heal people through comedy, and but then it's like it just felt discordant. So I was like, okay, so this
And
changed and it's great.
it's it's possible that, and some do. Robin Williams did that
Oh yeah,
things and
yeah,
various things, but it's doesn't feel true. There's something not true about it. I'm not
yes,
resonating. I'm not in my best spot, and uh, it can take a while to get there. We're in good spots. We have good spots, and like
yeah,
I was acting. It's great. I'm doing films. I'm doing plays, singing things. I'm writing songs. I'm winning competitions. It's
yeah,
fantastic. But it wasn't quite right because when I got to 40 and say, who do you really want to be?
yes,
Uh, and I was being offered roles. I mean, I wasn't short of offers, but they they weren't interesting. And I got offered a really dark character. And I just said to my agent, I said, I don't want to find that guy.
mm,
Because I kind of would find because you can, all these people. And I said, I don't want to find him.
right.
So I found this guy instead. He's much more fun,
I
much more
like this
enjoyable
guy.
to be with.
Yeah,
Yeah, I quite like him too now. Although he's far from perfect, but that of course is what allows more learning to occur. Oh, that's interesting. So errors and mistakes, they're just new information.
right.
Stage one. Oh, wow, I did that wrong. Whoa, cool. Now, what does that what does that mean?
How's it apply to me?
What's
Yeah.
where does it go? How does it apply to me? Oh, I get it. This is how to do that. Oh my God, that's a better way of living. Stage three. Now I'm going to live that way.
Well, the
Now I,
collaborator in stage three. So you find that you did something wrong, you apply it, you're like, aha,
yeah, you collaborate. I mean, you collaborate in stage three because you co-create. We naturally we co-create therapeutically. We co-create creatively. The pause and the integrate is a quiet time. That tends to be the point of
yeah,
meditation and the points of things. But you don't. It isn't the focus. That's the the reassuring and
yeah.
the conviction and making it. And the trouble is, what we do is we get a lot of people. They get excited about the creative bit, but they don't implement it.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
mostly what we're doing in this modern world is we're stuck in stage one.
yeah.
Just, I don't want to find out what it means. Just give me something new. Give me something more. Give me something next.
Right. Scrolling through
And
TikTok, new, 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 new,
all that
new.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know about politics and all those sorts of things that they're deeply worrying. But if somebody is constantly barraging you with something else, something more,
Yeah.
that's to stop you figuring out where you stand.
Mm.
That's to stop you doing it. And we see it in as in these coercive control and domestic violence. We see it
Right.
in all kinds of stuff. And that thing of, I mean, you're great because I'm the guest, so I can prattle on, and so I'm kind of dominating, and I know that. But it would be equally nice just to just ease up a little bit, and I say a bit, and then I pick up my beer, and you go for a while, and
Right. Right.
but I know that the role of this one is that. But you're
Yeah.
jumping in.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too. So you mentioned I want to go back to truth because when you talked about truth, where you said truth isn't energetic, and yet when I find my truth, I get energy.
Yes, it's presence. We misunderstand uh, with so we are uncompromised. So we feel completely energetic. So we're able to be totally engaged with our energetic presence.
Yeah.
And I say energetic, right? I avoid things like energy because I think that word's getting kind of screwed around with things
Yes,
too
let's
much.
say more about that. Yeah.
But everybody's energetic. We all are vibrating and moving
Right.
and things. And I'm not sure that we have the sorts of controls and manipulations and things that is expressed, but I do know that when I'm present in that
Yes.
energy that is mine, that is constantly able to improve, that then I feel safe and I feel comfortable and I feel creative. Then I waffle off it a bit and I go, whoa, that's interesting. I need
Yeah.
some interactive therapeutic, which might be self-therapeutic. It might be therapeutic with my wife. It might be going off
Right.
to see a professional. I mean, thing is now everybody I know is a professional, so therapy's cheap. You know, hey, I was just want to have a quick
Right.
chat. But um, yeah, and so you're right on it, Ryan. When you're in it, it's not so much you feel energetic, but your energy is neither enhanced or diminished. It's just
Mm.
present and it's just solid.
Right.
So like it's like, I'm there. Whereas when you're in these other things like, oh, I'm really good, you move too quickly in the energy. Oh, just a minute, I've got to. Whereas
Yes.
when you're in your truth, it's right with you, and uh, and you can just stop
Right.
about. And I do this with people with their affective disorders. They say, "Oh, I have a lot of anxiety." I say, "Okay, just settle. We'll go through a few things, and we do some settling things." And they say, "I got this problem. I got that problem." Yeah. So those things would make someone anxious.
Right.
And I go, "Yeah." I said, "So you having anxiety makes a lot of sense." Oh,
Oh, yeah.
okay. Okay. Now we don't want that, but that's true. If you have all this shit, so what are we gonna do? Are we worried about the anxiety or are we worried about all the shit? And they go, oh, I think the shit. Excellent. So let's get our shovels out and get rid of that stuff because your anxiety is just telling you that you've got this crap
Right.
around you.
Right. And it
So
starts looping and piling on. And so when it's piling on, how do we get the shovel out?
yeah, yeah, that's right. So actually, the shovel's the wrong metaphor because that's the one I use for the negative response. So the looping stuff. See, we talk about looping. Timothy September's doing a lovely to talk about into the loop.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, what he's cognitively, but also intuitively tapping into, is the fundamental nature of complex systems. And one of the fundamental elements of that is that a negative loop returns to the system. A negative realization returns
Yeah.
and it feeds the system. So the system goes into the negative loop. Positive things do exactly the opposite. And
Yeah.
if you get out of one into another, you have a piece of chaos in between where you're actually retrievable, but then often go down there. So actually, kind of the negative loop is shifting the metaphor, but using the same one is the shovel. We try to dig ourselves out of trouble.
Right.
Um, the way in which we do it, the metaphor I think which works simply is just springboard. Positive and
Mm.
creative and curious is a springboard. If you're standing on the end of something that's bouncing,
Yeah.
that's bouncing,
Yeah.
pushing
Yeah.
you upwards, go with that. If you're in something that's covering you up and protecting you and making
Right.
you feel then stop because
Mm.
you aren't safe by being secluded and
Right.
dissociated and disconnected.
Right.
You're actually safer by connecting. And here's another little of those nuggets, I suppose, is that given the opportunity and the appropriate circumstances, our system, amongst many others, but the human system, will move towards a more positive outcome. That's what it
Wow.
does. No, that's what it does. There's no how you don't
Interesting.
have to worry about that. If the in the appropriate conditions and the appropriate circumstances, your genes will express positive proteins and
Oh,
improve your
okay.
system. Your cells will operate
Right.
in an operant way. Your visceral framework, your hormones and peptides,
Right.
your neurobiological function. But none of them do it because the other's doing it. They all do it in the context of the situation. And fundamentally,
Mm,
I can say that that's true because if we didn't move into a more beneficial state, our species wouldn't survive. We'd just
mm,
die. If we didn't have an immune system that moved us better, if we
right.
didn't have a mental health system and a mental health and social system where we were able to survive, we wouldn't have made it. And
Interesting. And I'm
and
thinking
remember,
of two things. I forget the doctor. I think it was Dean. Was it Dean Ornish on the West Coast where
Dean Ornish.
he had a
Yeah,
study where he did a almost vegan diet, and then he did these other protocols. But one of the interesting things was the community and how it reversed the telomeres. And I'm not saying that word right. I'm sure
so the thing is,
the telomeres and the DNA, like it almost reversed aging, right? Like,
yeah. Well, you got a bit carried away, but Dean's made that there
yeah,
is great. But what we do is we have at the end of our DNA, because the reason why DNA works is because it's got sort of little holders at each end. So otherwise, and what it did in early evolution, it would these things were coming together as RNA packages, but then they just split up again and then so we've got telomeres at one end and what we called as a CG complex. Anyway, at the other end, and so these telomeres are our aging mechanism. So each time the gene separates and reproduces, that telomere breaks down a little bit until eventually you get into your 70s, 80s, and 90s, and cells start to break down and DNA starts to break down, different in different places of the body. And so telomerase is a chemical that comes to sort of repairs it a little bit.
mm,
So what Dean's talking about is you do these things, the community, the all that engagement and relational stuff is terribly important. The food is those things are terribly important as well. And it maximizes the capacity for the body to have the least amount of damage to the telomeres as
mm,
possible. So I know people. So I'm what you call a reasonableist. So that's my
yes,
description. It
yeah,
sells a lot better to say, and you stop the aging process,
yeah,
but it doesn't. Um, but it certainly reduces it, and then or slows it down and makes it more uh, uh, effective.
right,
That's why good immune systems you make it more effective. There's by working it by going through the four-stage creative cycle, by developing and improving.
right.
Uh, and so we take drugs to help ourselves, and the body says, "Oh, great! I don't have to do any improving." Um,
Mm,
and so this is why we have problems when we over medicate.
right.
We reduce our own capacity to produce those things, as different from using those things to help us as stimulants and assisters. We we're pill popping and all these
Right.
things. A long, long, long discussion. But this principal point of
Yeah.
if we actually listen to ourselves and we're going, gee, I feel awful. Okay, why? What's it about? That's interesting.
Yes.
Uh, now, what is that about? Is it sleep? Is it food? Is it stuff? Is it because my relationship's no good? Is it because I'm oppressed? Is it because I'm worried? Is it
Right.
half a dozen of these things all working together and creating an impact? And when I figure that out, okay, so what do I create? What do I
Mm,
change? Because creativity is change.
right.
What do I, what do I, where can I move myself to where I haven't been yet?
Mm, yes. I love that. And real quick, I want to, I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
We talked about
And now,
energy.
excuse me a little bit. Just
Yeah.
uh, not much of a thing. It's called power.
Power would help.
Yeah, yeah, we're good.
So I'm
So
wondering about
that turns out I
energy.
told you I wasn't perfect.
I'm wondering about energy and creativity. And then my mind goes off to this great story, one of the greatest stories ever told, Star Wars. And you're talking about the midichlorians, and then I'm thinking about the mitochondria within us. So
Absolutely.
can you read my mind here?
And this is what these stories tap into, and
Yeah.
they do it. I mean, Avatar is great
Yeah.
because it's saying be connected, find the feeling between things. And even in Avatar, we wouldn't have believed it if they jumped on those horses and just had this spiritual thing. So he physicalized it and
Oh,
he made
yes.
it something, and we
Yes.
could believe it. And we go, oh, I wish I was like that. And I said to a few people, I said, yeah, but do remember that you also could get killed at any minute. You lived in nature. It was tricky. But these guys, I mean, Lucas, they're not dumb, and the mitochondria and what it does, the importance of it. That actually we have more DNA in us that is not us than is us. So we've got the mitochondria, and they're in every cell, and that's a symbiotic bacteria that's just sort of say, well, I'll live here. If that's okay, I'll just give you some energy and a few other bits and pieces. And of course, we have our gut bacteria, which is
Mhm.
the microbiome. And there's more, DNA in there, and that's fascinating. I mean, the thing without going into them too much in uh, a talk like of this sort of, we've only got an hour, but without also kind of make them too light. It's just fascinating. There is so much stuff. And the only thing that I recommend to people when I'm saying I'm not going to tell you all the stuff that's in my head because that would be annoying, um, is just remember that a little bit of knowledge is a little bit of knowledge. And don't behave as if you have a lot of knowledge when you only have a little bit. A little bit of knowledge is a springboard to the next bit of knowledge.
Yep.
And maybe now I'm kind of think it's probably not unreasonable that I say, no, I think I know a lot about that. Um, but there's still a lot that I don't know a lot about.
Right.
And I still pause and halt and go, um, it's not simply described, some of these things yet. And we're trying to push through the things and push uh, and find information that will save us rather than get information, figure out what it means to us, have a breakthrough of meaning, and then
Yeah.
create something personal. Uh,
Yeah.
we're just sort of saying, "Oh, you fix it." Oh, yeah, I'll do. I'll do another course. I'll do another thing,
Mm.
and if you want to sell stuff, I mean, this is the trouble I have with mirroring hands. I just can't get up there and say, this fixes everybody and it's the simplest thing and
Right.
you'll know it in 2 hours and no one will ever have any problems anymore. I
Right.
said, this is a mechanism that for me works most effectively and most regularly. And so I utilize it within my many other skills and capabilities.
Right.
And people go, oh, that's not very exciting. But for me, it is. Mm.
And one final question, but in a moment we'll get to the ending where we'll get a hypnotic gift for our
Yeah.
listeners. And
Cool.
um I'm wondering, so we talk about this four-step process, and the end is creation. How do we, and I'm thinking about the book War of Art. How do we share when we create something? How do we share it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and probably has a year to answer it. Uh, but first of all, we implement the we implement the creation in our own experience. So that's the first thing. So be the change you want to see in the world.
Mhm.
The old Gandhi thing. Uh, and then it's being sensitive to the opportunity to share. What we do is we have a lot of people who are very, very keen to share, but pretty insensitive to the fact that not everybody wants to be shared to, you know.
Right.
And so being sensitive, and this is actually the PhD has come out, that the key, the central feature of the whole thing is to be sensitively aware, to be sensitively observing. and to increase our sensitivity, to increase our ability to notice the eyebrow movement and the head change and the breathing shift and the tone of voice and the atmosphere and all those things. And it's to be able to then share collaboratively,
Mm.
as different from indoctrinate wisely. I know.
I love it.
I mean, where I'm sitting here dropping these nuggets, you could imagine that I could sit here and be saying, "Now, Ryan, what you need to do is you need to
Right.
root your truths, and your truth is the and here comes the thing."
Right.
But no,
Here's a
I
course
go,
for
"Hey,
$199.
that's right,
I'll
that's
give
right."
you your
I know,
truth.
and I go, "Hey, here's something I think." And what happened in our experience? You went, "Oh, I like that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I went in and I started pursuing it and expanding it and delving it and then treating a bit more. If you'd gone by and it had, gone over your head or, wasn't thing, then we would have gone somewhere else.
And that's the play of life.
Yeah.
You mentioned that
And
play, and that's what it is. It's just playing. Let's see what happens and unfolds.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And
then,
what was the wonderful one? It says if the world is a stage and we are all but players, who the hell is the audience?
who is the audience?
Who is the audience?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another podcast episode. Stay tuned. Who is the audience?
Or it's just my only joke.
All right. So before we get to the little hypnotic gift, do you have anything? If you could say one thing to the whole world, what's one thing you would like to convey?
Yeah, that's a good thing, and I think people should do that more often. When what it is to be sensitive to yourself and your sensitive sensitivity to others and the space between you, and try and feel when you are in yourself, and when you're not, where are you? Where have you moved? That movement we have within and out. Sometimes it's just breathing and expanding. Other times it's losing and disconnecting. And when we understand that, then we can start doing some of the other things. And we'll have to have another one. I'll give you part two later.
Sounds good. And maybe we'll find out who the audience is in part two.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So I'll just mute my mic, and then for anyone who's listening and watching, of course, we'll say please be safe and don't maybe not do this part, maybe pause it and come back to it when you're not driving.
Yes. Yes. No. No. No driving because I don't know what you're going to do. And this, I think, I'm just giving myself a little bit more. Oh no, no, my camera's going to eject. Thank you, camera. Anyway, I'll work it. So what we do, I mean, hypnosis has a lot of things. We have directive hypnosis, we have induced trance, we have people going into trance, we have attempts to do it. Mirroring hands approach is basically I create the opportunity and the circumstances for you to do whatever is necessary for you. Now, that could be something very deep and engaging. It could be something very light. It could be nothing at all. It could be, I don't want to do this. So mirroring hands is a fail-safe practice because we have no expectation or demand. And the good thing is if you come to me as a therapist and you say, oh, let's do mirroring hands and it doesn't work, I got 50 other things. Don't worry, we're fine. I read all those books. And there are 50 other things because if you don't want to do that, well, that means you want to do something else, but you just don't know what it is. So with mirroring hands, it's often now I just think it just falls in a serendipitous way because people's hands are doing things all the time. But let's do it as if we're learning to play the piano for the first time, and so we learn the techniques. And the hands are wonderful because they occupy a very large part of a lot of neurons, and so they're very obvious and apparent in our perception. So if you focus on and you really look at, we do that important thing about shifting our mental state by using focus of attention. And I've kind of got your focus of attention after the last hour of talk. But it's quite fascinating when you look at your hands. You know, how big are they? How long are your fingers? Are they thin, or is your palms flat or a bit pudgy? Or it's really quite interesting that and it's almost if we focus and just let our hands almost talk to us. I wonder if you feel like one hand's a little different. I don't know. Is it feels a little heavier, maybe, or warmer, cooler, or even someone the other day said it felt a bit older. Maybe there's a twitch, or maybe there's a. Now, we haven't prepared. There's a group of you. I don't know who you are. And you may have things that you're considering. And what we do is we get overwhelmed by the most dominant thing. And if we could just separate them, if we could just get the dominating thing out of the way, maybe we can see some of the wonderful things that are being hidden. I wonder if one of your hands feels like receiving, is it a dominating thing? Is it yeah, just let the hand start to receive. Is it a problem? Is it a thought? Is it I don't know. It'll be different, and you might find one hand starts to move, maybe all by itself, maybe down, maybe to the side, maybe up, maybe just bouncing away, maybe just staying exactly where it is. There's no rules. It's just interesting. Just let that. And I wonder as your hand begins to show that it's doing something, maybe you become consciously aware of what's in your hand. Maybe it's something you can describe in words. Maybe it's just a feeling. Maybe it's a color. Maybe it's an object. For each person listening, there's no rule. What does it mean? That's right. There's no need for me to talk about it. Just let that hand go to where it needs to go. And although we could spend a lot more time, we're just having a little feel, a little dabble our feet in the water. But let's draw our attention to the other hand. Now we've got whatever was going on in that first hand out of the way. What? Yeah. What else is there? I wonder, is it a strength? Is it a new understanding? Is it just some knowledge that you need? Or is it just yeah, just that. And I wonder if that hand is also choosing its own movement, whether it's just staying still or what does your body want to do and what does your hand want to do with your body? About this this hand that yeah, that's right. Now, of course, everybody listening is having a different experience, and that's okay. And that's important that you have your own experience. And I wonder if you feel like maybe you'd like to continue doing this. But we're going to run out of time here. But I want you to know that this process can continue. This process is not about me. This process is about you. And I wonder when that inner part of you just knows it will be able to continue at appropriate times. I don't know. Meal times where you have a pause before you go to sleep in your dreams. And when your conscious mind just agrees to notice that it's time to do a little bit of peaceful, calm, restorative work. And you're able to just let the hands go for now. Let the work pause for now, knowing that it hasn't ended. We've just planted the seed. Okay. And welcome back, Ryan.
Oh, that is so fun. I hope people really engage with that. That is great. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm looking forward to hearing reports. I know you're presenting and Hitting the Thoughts Live coming up in this year.
Yep.
A lot of
Great.
presentations.
Yeah, I got a couple of workshops and a presentation, and then I'll just be, this time I'm just going to wander about and just chat to as many people as I can. It'll be a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, you take care, Ryan. Bye for now.